Great Monday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host today, Reggie. Hey, Reggie.
I'm doing really well, King. It's good to see you. As you know, our listeners probably don't know, but you and I actually met in person yesterday for the first time over breakfast, and so that even deepens how good I feel this morning.
same here. It was truly a blessing to see you and Sherry and break bread in the manner in which we
Yeah,
did. So to everyone to be healthy and be present, that's it's a blessing nowadays when I can be in those kind of environments.
I agree.
So with that being said, let's go ahead and right into our gratitude moments. I would say I'm grateful for my life, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm grateful for another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life. I'm grateful for you and Sherry for having the ability to come through Baltimore or Columbia and get a chance to break bread with you and had a great conversation as well as actually good food. So you turned me on to a local restaurant in the area that I probably would go back to again. I actually enjoyed the food. I'm also grateful for my mother, been alive and still having a wonderful weekend with her and being able to cook and get experience inside of her when she can just sit back and be taken care of, try to make her life as comfortable and enjoyable as much as possible. And finally, I'm grateful for the infinite possibilities this day may bring.
Yeah, beautiful. And so, as always, I'm grateful for my indoor plumbing and my refrigerator with food in it. And more specifically, we took a drive last Thursday down to Washington D.C., visiting um, Shari's son, and we just got to walk around the Capitol for a bit, and be some places I hadn't been in some years. Got to see the Women's Union March, which was a long march of a variety of women's unions marching around the greater DC area, and also a political march, which I won't get into the details of that one, when we were in DuPont Circle yesterday. Actually, not yesterday, but the day before on Saturday. So got to just kind of touch base with some of that, some of those freedoms that we have in this country, even though we disagree with each other on many issues. Not you and I, but as citizens. But just the being grateful for the ability to take out to the street and make your voice known. And a lot of places you either get put in jail or shot for doing that. So I'm grateful for that. And then just for the amazing ability to get in a car. Not that I like being in a car for 7 or 8 hours, but to drive someplace, have someplace to stay, which doesn't cost too much. Um, there's food available. Visit with some people. Again, meeting you on the way back, and to do all that in a 4-day period. It's just, again, I'm not the best traveler in the world, especially driving in rain for 7 hours yesterday. But just to be able to do that, it's a really simple thing, but I think it's not a small thing that we have the freedom and the ability to travel, to visit, and in a relatively safe way. So that's all the things I'm grateful for this morning.
Excellent, excellent. I concur, but I tell you, man, with the Mark, I don't know if it's lately. I used to love road trips. I can drive. I've driven to St. Louis from Maryland uh, over 30 times. It's 12 hours each. Detroit, uh, other cities, and used to love driving. Making playlists, hit the road. And I'm always a straight through person, especially if it's under 20 hours. I'm straight through. But
Yeah.
lately, I don't know if it's the last 6 months or so, but my bladder, I would literally have to stop every hour on the road. Totally inconvenient. So I don't know if you had that same issue. You could just ride through or not drink or while you're on the road. Probably the other reason I sustain 3 or 4 hour, gas trips only.
So I'm laughing as you say that, because that's something that it shifts over time with most men that I know. And I've got, I think I got a decade and a half on you. But yeah, on days when I know I'm going to be traveling, I'm just really careful with my, coffee intake, and I drink water all day long. And I don't drink as much water. I sip it. I still have to pull over a few times. But yeah, I don't know anyone who's my age that doesn't have that issue. I mean, there's different degrees of it. So that's just part of the deal, I think, King.
Oh, okay, well, at least that makes you feel a little better.
Yeah.
But I'm not the only one.
No, you're definitely not the only one.
I'm a stickler. Gas stops only, and you can occasionally get something to eat, but depending on how I'm feeling. And back in the day, I would eat on the road and just grab some fast food and continue to drive. So I guess nowadays, when you get older, you learn that you don't have to be in such a hurry. Leave a little earlier, get on the road a little earlier, and you plan a little more strategically than I guess when you're younger. So I guess that must be how I have to move forth. Well,
yeah, that's been my experience. So yeah.
All right. So what's your spiritual energy level today?
I'm 10, and I didn't even have to choose it. It's really there. I got up this morning, and it was the first time sleeping in my own bed last night in 4 days, and I know I had a lot of catching up to do with work things, because I purposely didn't do a lot over the weekend. I just tried to be present to visiting and enjoying myself a bit, and got a decent night's sleep. Got up this morning. Got a lot of things out of the way, kind of logistical, administrative things I had to do, knowing we were going to meet for this podcast. So I'm good. I'm good to go. I like working. I like the work that I do. So I'm just kind of geared up to dive into this week.
Excellent. Well, I concur with you. I'm a 10, and like I said, every morning above ground and with the ability to see, hear, and be present. Have sound mind to me is at a 10. Just get better and get worse throughout the day, but I refuse to have a bad day. I might have bad moments in my day, but I refuse to have an entirely bad day. That's a choice as well. So with that being said, how about we go ahead and get into our topic for today?
Yeah, so we've been speaking about for over a year and a half now about my book, Healing America's Narratives, the Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, with the tagline, Becoming More Fully Human. And most recently, probably for the last month or so, last week, we had Ken Fraser and Sean Harvey joined us speaking about, the evolution of men, of becoming more vulnerable and becoming less problematic in the world. And underlying that, we've been speaking about this developmental move, where most of the problems that we have, not all of them, but most in this country and around the world, are what I refer to as an us-centric or a group-centric developmental worldview, where the world is divided into me and my groups and the other groups. And what makes it unhealthy is it's me and my groups are against the other groups. So you can see it polarized in this country with there's actually more than just two. There's the extreme right Republicans who are disrupting the United States Congress right now and led by Donald Trump. There are the moderate Republicans. They don't seem to say too much nowadays. And then there's the moderate left Democrats, and then some Democrats who are further to the left. And especially the extreme right Republicans nowadays, this is not to pick on Republican Party in general, but the current version of it is, they've really created an antagonistic us versus them perspective in this country. But you see the same thing with people who are strongly either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine in the current, horrific situation going on in Gaza, which began back on October 7th. And not to in any way minimize any of these issues that I'm speaking about, But anytime a group says, this is what's right, and those people are all wrong, or worse, they're evil, nothing good comes of that. And where the progress gets made is where people are able to say, okay, this was bad, they did this, but we don't want to continue doing horrific things to each other. So we want to move forward. So all that said, where we really wanted to focus today, and I want to credit psychologist, that's even kind of reductionist to call her just a psychologist, but Carol Gilligan, who is wrote her research back in the 60s into the 70s, and she wrote a book called In a Different Voice, meaning a woman's voice, in terms of research on moral reasoning. And that book changed a lot of people's lives. It came out in the 1982 or 83, I think. This past month or two, she came up with a book, and she's published other things since then, but a book called In a Human Voice, where she revisits her research mostly with women and girls and speaks about what we're really looking for here as we balance feminine and masculine. These are my words now, not hers, is not so much what's a masculine voice and what's a feminine voice, even though we have to work through those because the culture has given us those, but what's a human voice? Because within the human being, there is both what we call masculine and feminine energy. And she gets very specific with her language, and she doesn't speak about this over and over again, but she refers to the patriarchy, that system run by men that, was true in monarchies and back in Europe and in other places, and how it manifests even here in America, that she points to two characteristics. One is that it's gender binary. In other words, it separates men and women. So the men dominate the women, right? And it's also hierarchical. Right? And that's just, she's dealing with gender issues. Now, obviously, we know that the patriarchy also has other issues as well in terms of sexual orientation, race, and other things. But it comes down to this binary view of the world, where there's, this is right and that's wrong. This is good and that's bad. And I'm almost to the end of this introduction. And what we're facing in the US now, and this is a gross oversimplification, but I think it's accurate, is that the people on the far right, number one, think they know what the correct interpretation of the United States Constitution is. Like, there's the way here's what the founders meant. And they don't know that. We can do our best guess, but we weren't alive 247 years ago, so that's problematic. But they have this divisiveness of it's us against them. It's, here's what's right, here's what's not right. When Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, was asked what his worldview is, he said, if you want to know my worldview, just read the Bible. Now, that's problematic. We don't have enough time to talk about how many ways that's problematic. Because I would ask him, well, which books in the Bible are you referring to? Because there's a lot of books in the Bible. That's one. And number two is, I would just say, well, what is the worldview of the Bible? If that's your worldview, what is it? Articulate it. You're a smart guy. You're a constitutional scholar. You're Speaker of the House. So, a biblical-based worldview is, now second in line after the vice president for the presidency. If should something happen to both the president and the vice president, next is the Speaker in the House. And this is a guy who blurs the separation of church and state and wants us to be a Christian nation. Now, I was raised Catholic, which most Christians don't view as Christian. I know that. But I'm getting too specific here. We're getting back into, what we're looking at is this binary view of the world, which both allegedly progressive people on this extreme left have, and which, by no means progressive people on the extreme right have. And they know that they're right. They're diametrically opposed, and they know that they're right. and they don't see any middle ground. They just know that the other side is wrong. And again, oversimplified but accurate, that's at the heart of much of what we're facing in this country right now. This tight, stuck, no room for interpretation or even moderation view of the world in the political polarities. And there are some people who would like nothing better to go back and have, white Christian males dominate the culture. And that's not a good idea, because we've seen the result of that over, a century and a half. So that's my long introduction to today.
Well, thank you again for choosing such a wonderful time. A lot of things come to mind when you were laying out the binary roles. What always comes to my mind is, and it's so clear to me, but it's through years, decades of growth, of personal development. And all I see for me now is the path to be fully human. Mm-hmm. Now, I know that wasn't always the case. I know that I was focused on seeing myself, again, identity. That's what I think it goes back to, is how you identify yourself. You identify yourself as Republican white male, as this Republican white woman, or this Black male Democrat, this Black female Democrat. That's how you identify yourself, and you take on the characteristics of that identity, good and the bad. Of course, you're going to see the others as they're wrong, as you say. They're wrong, we're right. And the more they talk, the wronger they are. And separate we are, the more we even try to talk, the more divisive we become. We're not even getting any closer or nearer a solution, because the more we engage in communication, the more I see how different we really are, and how extreme your views are, and how wrong your views are. And I can see, if I really began to try to put myself in that lens, I call it, that identity lens, if I begin to put myself in narrow perspective, then you can see what other person may have I wouldn't say judgment, but I can understand where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. But then it's so limiting. It's kind of like, and again, use this analogy of lenses, was to put on bifocals. And then, if I move my head in one certain way, I could see a little clearer. And then if I move my head another way, the vision. But at the end of the day, I don't want the bifocals on, because it's too limiting, And that's how I feel about those identities. When you just choose one of those narrow identities, it's too limiting in your scope, and you don't find joy and happiness. That's why I believe most people are not happy, regardless of their wealth, regardless of, especially if they choose an identity that's different from being a fully human individual of continual growth. I don't think they're happy. I think they're content with life, and happiness is just on the other side of proving or dominating against the group that they feel is wrong. That's where happiness lies. And so I gotta stay in the battle. I gotta stay in the line until I become victorious, right? Like, sports metaphors. That's the enemy. That's the team that's my rival. I know sports loves to try to make teams rivals, and say, here's a history of how these two people went, and that's how, to me, they've become at that level, which is. And I think most people don't even look at it as being as dangerous as it is. They hint around the danger of it. But you look at the way politics grow to such identity politics nowadays, that it's easier to go to war. I mean, there's this piece of, and I don't know if they talked about the gentleman's race, who he was. At least I haven't heard from the news sources I listen to. It's where a gentleman who I believe was a landlord ended up stabbing a 6-year-old Palestinian child, because he felt that that's what the thing to do was. That child is such an enemy that the child needs to die. Now, who will think about starving a child? For just a lot of reasons, where the cowardice in that alone, the defenseless child, you're going to decide that this child needs to die. You have that much hate. To me, you have that much hate, I would go find a rival that's more my level of combativeness, that's equal to, that can pretty much take me out, and we equal with that. That's, if I had that much hate, that's how I would pursue it, as the identity of seeing myself as a centered man. If I put myself in that identity lens, I could never go fight and hurt someone that's not in a position to at least be equal as a combatant. So that to me is where I just see how so fulfilling for me to continue to be a growth-minded individual, and why I could not allow myself to, just like I said, put those on as my only view and then try to get through life and wonder why I keep bumping into things, have a headache, and not have such a clear, focused vision how to navigate through the world.
Yeah, I love that you used the word, among other things, but you spoke about being victorious, because as you were speaking, I mean, that really rings true, because a big problem with this binary thinking is both sides want to win. Winning is a big deal, and there's a great example of that from pop culture from years ago. I mean, this movie is probably close to in the vicinity of 40 years old, I think. Definitely over 30 years old. But it's a very young Al Pacino in a movie entitled "And Justice for All." He plays a public defender. He plays an attorney, where he's standing up for poor folks who need an attorney. And I won't do, in case anybody hasn't seen it, I won't do it. I'm not going to spoil it. But towards the end of it, he has this big speech towards the end of the movie, and he actually speaks to the jury when he's making his opening statement. He says, the problem that we have in the courtroom right now is that we talk about wanting the truth, but in fact, we're more interested in winning. He said, the problem we have is that both sides want to win. I want to win. And he points to the prosecutor. He says, and he wants to win. And then he goes on, and I won't say anymore. But it's this whole binary thing, and where it's set up so there have to be winners and quote unquote losers. And I mean, our whole society is set up that way. Now, I think winning is with sports well done, where you compete in an honorable way with a worthy opponent, as you said. That's great. And if you look at it on the Olympic levels, usually international, there's a really deep respect for competitors. And you're not a loser if you get a silver medal in the Olympics, although some people think they are. But the whole binary is based on winning, where I have to win. If I, as a white Christian male, I have to dominate those who are not Christian, those who are not white, or those who are not male, and that's the winning. And that whole idea of white Christian nationalism is really prevalent in this country right now. The news doesn't speak about it much unless they interview an author, but that's a real strong, just below the surface source of funding, and to a certain, definitely influence. I don't know how much control they have in terms of who's in Congress and which corporations are most honored based on their lobbying, which industries. So again, it's really problematic. And for those of us, and this is going to sound elitist, and I don't intend it to, but for those of us who do look at another human being, whether it's a 6-year-old Palestinian kid, whether it's President Joe Biden, whether it's Representative Lauren Boebert, whether pick one, whether it's a movie star or a professional athlete, And if we only see gender, economic status, public recognition for the stars and the famous people, and we get all that stuff gets in the way of seeing another human being. Oh, that's a Republican, MAGA Republican woman. I don't like her. Lauren Boebert. Oh, that's LeBron James. He's so successful. He does a lot of good in the world with his success. So I admire him. Ku Klux Klan person probably wouldn't admire him as much, a white supremacist. But we have not been educated, and for the most part raised, even before education kicks in, formal education, to just recognize other human beings, member of the same species, 206, 208 bones. If we're healthy, a couple of eyes, 2 nostrils, the potential for 32 teeth. And even the people I disagree with are human beings. They're the same species. I don't need to attack them personally when I disagree with them ideologically. And the ability to do that, to avoid the personal attacks and just have the position or ideological or issue-based disagreements, that's becoming a lost art, both domestically and internationally. And it all has to do with this winning. We have to defeat them to save the country, because the far right thinks that the left that wants to provide health care for everybody, that wants to make sure that every American, regardless of sexual orientation or skin pigmentation or accent or what country they immigrated from, that they all have equal access to the American promise. And on the far right, they see that as being un-American, letting all of these people who come here be equal in the eyes of what they think the white Christian founders meant. Whereas on the left, they look at these MAGA Republicans who are basically moving towards more of an authoritarian, where a guy by the name of Paul Weyrich, back in 1980, before Ronald Reagan was elected, he basically said, we don't want everybody in this country to vote. The more people that vote, the harder it is for us to push our agenda forward. We want fewer people to vote. That's a Republican, significantly to the right view, and it still exists. If you notice what the states did once the Supreme Court weakened the Voting Rights Act back in, I forget what year that was, the last couple of years. And immediately some of the states, many of the former Confederate states, began to redraw congressional districts so it would be harder for progressive Democrats to win seats, both in the state houses and in the federal House of Representatives. So it's a real contentious view where both sides think that what the other side is doing is un-American. And nobody seems to be getting tired of that fight. That, in terms of having a real adult conversation where they might actually be able to find some common ground. They don't do that. The only place that happens is with moderates, and most of the moderate Republicans are afraid to speak out loud because Donald Trump will then attack them and they may not get reelected. That's a real thing. Happened to Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, so they just decided to leave the Congress. So it's problematic.
Yeah, he refers to them as rhinos,
Yeah. And the irony is, he's not even, Donald Trump's really not a Republican. Most of his life, he has supported Democratic agendas in terms of the Democratic Party in his adult life, but there was no chance that he would ever become the Democratic candidate because of who he is and what he does and what he says. But he was able to, once the, the Council for National Policy, CNP, that's a pretty powerful group. And they actually they expected that Jeb Bush would be the candidate in 2016. And when that became obvious it wasn't going to happen, they wanted Ted Cruz. And once Trump became the candidate, they had conversations with him, and he was willing to take their support and their money in return for putting forth their agenda, because he didn't really care what the agenda was. He was willing to do whatever the funders would, who were going to support him would do. So it's a real mess, and it's kind of a scary situation. And he's, effectively ignorant of the United States Constitution and any sense of how to actually govern. Because he's never been in governance. He's been a dictator of his own company. He's the guy. He doesn't have to report to anybody. There are no checks and balances. So the presidency actually made him less of a free man. And he didn't like it, but he'd do it again because it puts him at the top of the heap internationally, and he likes that feeling of power.
Yeah, he's definitely that for sure. I came across a video, it came on my feed just 2 days ago on YouTube, and it was a roast. It was a little short clip on those YouTube shorts, and Snoop Dogg was insulting a female comic, but whose roast it was, they were roasting Donald Trump. And I'm sitting here looking at most of the people who were on that panel roasting Donald Trump. Attendants were definitely folks who you would say were all Democrats, whether they're white, black, or whatever the case may be, a lot of celebrities, but they were the kind of that would be much more liberal in their thinking. And you see Donald Trump just, that was his tribe at that time, so to speak. So to your point, he's definitely an opportunity. So, and that's why I see most people nowadays who I would say double down on their particular identity as relates to politics. It's really opportunists at the end of the day. Very few people who are getting the most attention really truly believe in what they're saying. They just see that pays more money, they get more visibility, they get much more coverage and much more clicks to be on the extreme of where their identity is. That they more outrageous, or I would say polarizing they be. That's what they're looking for. Donald Trump pretty much created that. He said, "I'm gonna." And again, I from my own research, I said that the news was basically wrestling. You watch wrestling, that's what wrestling is. It's nowadays it's gotten to the point where it's, of course, obviously scripted, but you become a heel, and the most ridiculous things you can say in your role as that heel, the fans crazy and the fans love you, and even though that's not who you truly are, but your character you create is what people identify and what people love. And I think people have taken it to politics, and they're not looking at the consequences of that role, because the people who follow them are not playing a role. They're believing what who is an author, speaker, writer, columnist is spewing. Their rhetoric they're spewing, they're believing that. And so they go out and do the extreme actions. Like most of the people who write the books, or who are the political analysts or leaders of these movements, are not going to go out to a restaurant and say that there's children in the basement. Let me go ahead and there's children being held at this pizza restaurant in DC, so let me go rescue them. They're not going to do anything to that extent, but their followers will.
Yeah. And
they don't take into account how extreme their followers are going to be, whether it's left or right. One thing I wanted to point out that I thought was really interesting, but I wanted to make this note, was recently, it makes you rest in peace. Another former Supreme Court justice died, Sandra. Now, I didn't know much about her. I've always heard her name because she has that very interesting name you don't hear on a regular basis. So her name all been in my, I would say, world, so to speak, but not really understanding who she was other than the Supreme Court justice. But as I listened to people talk about her, from the context that she was a Reagan appointee, and how she voted on several issues, not necessarily on the conservative side, like voting for affirmative action, things of that nature. And what's really interesting about her and the way that the news talked about her, she wasn't a feminist. She's not even considered to be a feminist. And how the left, to me, has been able to, the media narrative, we put Ruth Bader Ginsburg on such a pedestal by being as feminist, who's a leftist progressive. They put her on a huge pedestal. And I'm listening to, and again, I got to do most of my research. Maybe you might be able to answer some, make things look clearer. But just in the short description, my cursory understanding, surface understanding is Sandra Day O'Connor. Why isn't she lifted up as just equal? She's like kind of left like, well, she's a Supreme Court justice and she's appointed by Reagan. And I mean, she didn't really get unfair when she died as Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I'm saying if this woman came into Congress, came on a court as a conservative woman who came off of the farm she lived on was as large as Rhode Island. So she had no understanding of what it means to be poor or struggling. If you come from a farm that's as large as Rhode Island, but yet and still throughout your tenure as a Supreme Court judge, you're able to see humanity in voting for issues that you may not necessarily agree with, but you see that this might be better for what's best for the country. That to me is more admirable than for one person to say, well, this is my identity and I'm gonna double down on that identity. And if you agree with this identity, then you lift this person up, and that makes sense. So unless I'm missing something that she did that was extreme, that's what I see how a country just really, we're gonna pick this person up, lift because they're the most extreme they can be, and that's who we should pay attention to. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. So.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought that up, King. And again, I wouldn't pretend to know the voting, not the voting records, but the decision, records on the Supreme Court of either Sandra Day O'Connor or Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I know a little bit about each, but the big deal with Sandra Day O'Connor was she was the first woman. So, there's a real kind of, I'm going to say irony. I think it might be ironic that a conservative president, all right, appointed, and she was, and she was a conservative justice before she was on the Supreme Court. Her views were, leaning, moderate right. She wasn't like some far right person. But that, in fact, and here's the irony, putting a woman on the Supreme Court is a progressive liberal move. There had not ever been one. Right? So that's the first piece. So whatever her life was like, because the guys that were sitting there, and I don't remember all the justices that were on the court when she was appointed, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg got pushback from some of the justices when she was appointed, which was, I don't know how many years later, at least a decade later. So Sandra Day O'Connor wasn't having like she wasn't sitting back with a cigar and a glass of scotch having it easy. She, that was a big deal. The first woman to sit on the Supreme Court. I think because Bader Ginsburg's history moving up to, before she was ever on the Supreme Court. I don't know Sandra Day O'Connor's litigation history. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was known as a kind of a fierce litigator, and she was known because of her battles just in Harvard Law School to be accepted as a woman, and then sacrifices she made based on her husband's career. So she had this whole backstory that was, so I think that's one of the reasons we know more about her than Sandra Day O'Connor. But I think your point is well taken. Women of any ilk know what it feels like not to be in charge, to be in second place historically. If you're a woman of color, you know it on a double dose of that, because you've been discriminated against both racially and based on gender. But I think your point, about Sandra Day O'Connor is really important. And She wasn't as, I don't think Ruth Bader Ginsburg was flamboyant until towards the end of her life, when the population began to make her into a celebrity. I mean, she didn't seek that, but people began to point to her because she was actually very clever with her language. And Sandra Day O'Connor was basically conservative. She wasn't out there to make big changes. She was out there to apply the Constitution to a given case, which Ginsburg did, phenomenally well as well. I mean, one of her cases before she was even a judge, where she and her husband litigated a case, I think it was called Moritz, Moritz, versus the IRS. And it was a guy who was refused a tax deduction. This guy, something Moritz, he was taking care of his mother and, kind of a full-time caregiver for his mom. And because he was, one, not a woman, and two, had never been married, he wasn't eligible for the same tax deductions that either a woman who would have been taking care of her mom or a married man who was divorced would get. So the law was written. It was one of the few laws that was written that discriminated against single men, single white men. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her husband litigated that and won, in favor of Moritz. So he was able to get the tax deduction, and the IRS law was changed. Now, I might not have the exact language of what happened down because I'm not a legal scholar, but I use that example in the book. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg, although she was known for her work for equality for women, if you read more about who she was and what she did, she was known for her work for equality for anyone who was not treated equally under the law, as the 14th Amendment, suggests. You and I both know less about Sandra Day O'Connor's history, but she was the first, and that is a big deal. And it must have been a unique experience for her to sit with all the boys on the Supreme Court bench, who probably weren't that happy to have her there, some of them. Right. But I love that you brought that up. Now we both have to go do some more research.
Yeah, one of the things that we mentioned about her philosophy as it came to her, what position she supported, was the fact that even maybe this is where this is the part that I have initial admire her, is because they say that even though she may not necessarily agree with affirmative action, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree with affirmative action, she felt that if you're willing to put forth the work and you want to be a better citizen, then she wanted to support that ideology. That was her basis for that. If you're standing up and you want to improve your life, then I want to support that. I don't want to get in the way. I don't want to block that. And that, to me, is what I'm saying, more growth there. I'm not saying that I'm taking anything away from Ruth Bader Ginsburg at all.
Right.
But I'm saying that, to me, a person who comes out, this is my stance, but I'm open to listening to a perspective and learning from a position that I may actually say, okay, even though I necessarily started off here initially, you've kind of moved me. And that's what I'm not saying nowadays. But whatever the gets moved in, it's like if I start off here as my position, I'm firmly entrenched in my position. And as you said earlier, I want to make so entrenched in my position that I want you to lose.
Yep.
I'm not looking to come to the table to learn anything at all. I know everything. I know you're wrong. And so now we're going to just have a discourse, and just for the ratings and to get eyes on us and sell our books or push our agendas. But at the end of the day, I want you to lose.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm not happy until you lose.
Yep.
And that, to me, like I said, at the end of the day, when I don't see how your soul is at peace with that. I can see how you can put money in your bank account. You try to chase material things. And I remember when I was in my 20s, and I was making six figures in corporate America without having kids, and I was able to pretty much spend, even though I'll bet foolishly, but I was able to go out and spend money on a lot of things. I thought the way to happiness was buying things. And I learned at that early age that I could not buy my happiness. No matter how many cars I try to purchase, clothes, I try to purchase jewelry, whatever. I thought that the media was telling me this is what makes you happy. This car, this jewelry, this vacation, this ability to live your life, in this lifestyle. This is where happiness, this is the path of happiness. I realized how much it wasn't. And I was more depressed than I had ever been in my life.
Yeah.
And so that's why I've learned that, to me, seeking peace of, and if we throw the term out, peace of mind, arbitrarily quite a bit. Yeah, I just want peace. But I don't think many people really think about what that really means, that true statement of when you're able to walk into a room of individuals and don't judge, that your mind's not telling you this person's short, fat, black, white, male, female, gay, straight, Republican, Democrat, and here's the reason why you don't like them. Having that run through your mind, uncontrollably, whether you might say those things or not, but your mind is shouting at those thoughts. That's where the is so loud. But to be able to filter that and walk into that room and have peace of mind where you're not judging and you're at peace with yourself because of the growth you've done, that to me is the ultimate bliss that I think that I'm striving for, that I hope that other people will put themselves on a similar path.
Yeah, that for what that last piece you just named, that for me, that's one of the biggest mysteries. So, what is it? And I'm not asking you if you know the answer to this question. That'd be great. But I'm not actually asking. I'm asking it rhetorically. What is it that we know some examples of it, but what is it that allows or invites an individual to become increasingly more self-reflective and, let's say, curious about other perspectives, such that not only are they, do they bump into other perspectives and they're willing to listen deeply, genuinely listen, but in fact that they seek other perspectives. In other words, it's an active move. It's not you happen to bump into somebody, have a conversation and say, oh, wow, that was interesting. I need to find out more. But that's part of who you are. You constantly are looking for new perspectives. Not that you're going to change everything that you believe, but you're open to this. Because as you say that, I think of, because it's so polarized in our Congress, I always go back there as examples. So what is it that makes, let's tell you, like take Mike Johnson, the guy that's the Speaker of the House now. I mean, he's a constitutional scholar. He litigated cases. He's articulate. And for the most part, he's closed. He has an agenda. The Bible is his worldview, whatever that means. But he's not stupid. He's an educated, articulate man. He's probably a wonderful father. But what is it that allows? I'll go to the opposite extreme now, not extreme, but what is it that allows someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York? I think she has part of Queens and the Bronx, or her district. I'm not sure exactly, but it's in Queens somewhere. Who's this? And she's young. I don't know if she's 30 yet. When she was elected, she was still in her 20s. She didn't go to law school. She's not a constitutional scholar, but she's, and she's progressive, and you have to agree. I'm not saying that she's right in all of her views. I'm not saying she's wrong either, but that she's open to listening and to hearing other perspectives. And I only know that because I got on her email list because I heard some things she said and I liked what she had to say. And she asked me for money now, but I don't give money for people I can't vote for. Sorry. And I don't give that much money anyway because I don't have it. But what is it that allowed someone like her, a young New York woman in her 20s, to evolve to a point where she has a more open view of things, and someone like him, who's probably, I don't know if he's in his 40s or early 50s, I'm not sure, to have all of this education and be closed. And there's thousands of other examples we could use. Those two just came to mind because they're both in Congress and they seem pretty far from each other. That's the mystery for me. And I love developmental psychology. I love the conversations and the research around adult development. And nobody can say why. They can say what happens and when and how this changes, and they can articulate individual experiences. But there's not this magic answer to explain, even like what you said, when you got that taste of good money and material success in your 20s, and you realized, wow, not so good. And other people can just stay in there and keep making the money and keep buying things. So what was it about you and other people in the corporate world who realized that the money wasn't making them happy? So that's the mystery for me. And I love that you raised that as an example, because some people go through their whole lives and stay locked in a worldview, even given opportunities, they never really develop. Others are like little developmental machines. They just keep looking for new perspectives. So when you figure out how that happens, let me know. Or unless,
yeah. Not that I have the answer for everybody, but I do know that for at least to me specifically, I spent, which I believe is a huge reason why I'm still single at this stage of my life, age and stage. It's because I'm always been I was never really satisfied. And so I constantly kept seeking, and I couldn't articulate it at that age. But now when I reflect, I know that's what it was. It was a constant feeling of what's next, how do I learn more, how do I grow? And if I felt that I was on one or in a job or doing something that was limiting me, like even when I had my 6-figure job, after a while, it was like, I'm more than in this position that they pay me. I have other thoughts. I want to do something more beyond this. And I want to just be limited to just being a system engineer. And so that's always been there for me. So now, one of the things I wanted to speak about Mike Johnson was that, again, this is where I say I believe his character. Because to me, I don't believe you can adopt a child that is not of your culture, of your race, into your family and not be somewhat open-minded. You have to be somewhat saying, I'm willing to humanity in this child, unless you had an agenda that says I'm going to raise his child a certain way and he's going to, go out and do anything that is more in line with his race, which I don't believe he raised a young man to be that way. I believe that he's going to vote according to what's in his interest politically, of course, because that's at this stage in life, the more extreme, the more you double down, the more political expedient that may be for you. You earn your political capital. And that's why I'm saying I don't see nowadays, I just don't see and it's for me, the willingness to be brave. It's like courage is no longer used anymore in politics. It's courage is thrown out, or people have redefined courage to be that I can say what I feel, whether it's right or wrong, as long as it's to my tribe. It electrifies my tribe, and that's courage, and that's not courage at all. Courage is, as you know, to pick a side, stand on your convictions, whether the majority of people like it or not. You stand with that because you feel it's just and you feel that it's right and it's the best interest of most people. In my definition of courage, I should say, at the very least. And so that's what I'm looking for nowadays. And for me, that's what I look for is courageousness. People are. You and I, Sherry was having a conversation yesterday, and she posed an interesting question. Like I mentioned the fact that documentaries based on serial killers or these crime shows. And I guess what I'm always looking for is the courage that survived that, who went through some horrific, traumatic experience like that, and still are human beings as a result. Whether I watch a movie, whether historically accurate or fiction, nonfiction, whatever the case may be, I'm always looking for courage in the protagonists.
Mm-hmm.
And if I find it, that's what I like to link on to and identify with. And that's what I like this movie or I dislike this movie based off of whether I see the courageousness in the individual and I agree with it or I learn something from it.
Yeah. So I don't know if to go back to End Justice for All, if you've seen that movie, but I think you would find some courage in the protagonist in that movie. I think you'd like that one. Again, it's a young Pacino.
And, just quickly, you look at people like Marlon Brando, took courageous stance, not the most, but a courageous stance, and I'm going to look for that movie, but that's what I believe that we need to get back into people. And that's why I believe our podcast is so important to talk about being fully human, because we constantly saying it's not about whether you agree with us or not, whether you agree with our particular positions. It's that you and I both agree to this core, I believe, basis, is that whatever we have as far as our feelings and perspectives on a particular issue or conversation, what we agree to do is be open-minded when we sit down and discuss it. We're not coming in for me to say, I'm going to teach Reggie this, or you're going to say, I'm going to teach King that, and that's the reason we're conversating. Let's bring our perspective. You're 60 plus years old, my 50 plus year old, black male, white male, Italian American perspectives to the table, raising, but at the same time, your growth as a coach, as a mentor, as a community activist, as an author, all the other labels you add to those initial descriptions I gave broadens your perspective and broadens your lens. And you're also a person who's committed to growth as well. Like I can see the growth in you from where you and I initially had our conversations started to where you are today. And I know that as long as you keep reading in your quest to become more fully human, you're going to continue to grow. And that's what I believe at the end of the day attracts us, our spirits to one another, and says that the time is to create with each other, and because we want to be on that same growth.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that, and I appreciate that's actually a great summary, because we don't say every week what it is we're doing here, but that's exactly it. That we're not speaking in a way where we think we know the answers to everything, either individually or the two of us together, and that people should listen to everything, should agree with everything we say, but we're willing to have the conversation in order to move toward becoming more fully human, which is not a destination you arrive at and you say, okay, finally, fully human, I'm done. I can relax. What's in the refrigerator? It's an ongoing growth to become as full a human being as possible, and the potential is beautiful and immense. And the process can both be exhilarating and frustrating at times. Like when you catch yourself in a moment when you weren't fully human, and you were a little bit caught up in your own ego or your shadow or whatever it is. But even that is part of being fully human. Oh, look what I just did again. Doesn't mean the world's over. The world didn't end, but you just say, oh, that's part of my full humanity, and I'm going to keep working to improve and improve and improve. So yeah.
So as we bring this show our conclusion and move into our section of providing folks information, what are some suggestions that you have that folks can have?
Yeah, so this idea of this whole, we really began with the binary, and then we expanded it out with a lot of examples of this either or, this or that perspective. So two things come up, and I think I may have used these in past episodes, but they're really relevant to what we're talking about today. So one is commit to deeply listening. And that's an easy thing to say, and we don't have time to go into the details of that. But to really listen to what another person has to say without judging it, without deciding how you're going to respond or retort, and just to really try to understand this other person's perspective, to really just deeply listen and just be curious. Wow, how did he or she or they get there? How did they get to that view? Now, obviously, if they agree with everything you say, then it's not that big a deal. But especially those moments when you disagree with someone, really deeply listen without the intention of trying to teach them something or persuade them. Just listen. That's one. The second one is, if somebody asks you a question or makes a statement that's binary, ask them for a better question. So as an example, if somebody says, are you pro-life or pro-choice? So, around the abortion issue. The way I answer that question nowadays, if it's asked that way, is I either say yes, which then invites more conversation, or I say, ask me a better question. And if the person can't do it, but they do want a conversation, then I'll say, here's the question that I'll answer. What is your opinion about abortion? That's a question I can answer, because it doesn't give me a choice. It doesn't say this or that. So, are you pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli? Ask me a better question, because my viewpoint isn't stuck in one of those two categories. So ask me a better question is a great way to respond to a binary statement or question. So those are the two things: listen deeply and avoid getting caught up in somebody else's binary worldview. Those are my two suggestions.
I love that. Question. That's definitely something I want to look to incorporate into my life going forward, because as you said, it doesn't close communication. You're not closing off the communication. What you're doing is you're inviting it to become much more thought-provoking and force the person now to read what they're saying. So, and then you said they can't ask you a better question. You give them a better way to ask the question, which again should, if they're really open to learning and they really want to have this communication with you, since they started maybe asking that question as their form of starting a dialogue, learn something from that. So I think those are very powerful steps, and I think we look forward to incorporating those into my life going forward. So this is definitely, we close things out. We always want to also highlight someone we believe as an individual has shown the fully human characteristics throughout their lives, whether they're past or present, and lift this person up and honor this person as a person who exemplifies being human. And we also do it as a way to let folks know that we're not just talking about fictitious things that don't exist, that this is something we all can strive to, and some people have already lived this life or are living this life currently. So with that being said, Reggie, who would you say is your person you want to hold up today as being fully human?
This is someone, I don't know if I've referred to this person before or not. I may have over a year ago, and I don't keep a journal of my responses, so I don't remember. But somebody who I bumped into, figuratively speaking, not in person, when I was a kid, I was 16 years old, was Chris Christopherson. And he was, I heard him singing a song on the radio, this is 1970, 71, where he had just begun to make a name for himself as a songwriter and a singer, reluctantly as a singer. And I found out that his background was, he was a college athlete. He boxed in the Golden Gloves. He played football and rugby. He won fiction award contests. He got a Rhodes Scholarship, studied at Oxford. Then joined the Army, became an Army Ranger and helicopter pilot, volunteered for Vietnam. They didn't send him. But what he ended up wanting to do was write songs. So after he got out of the Army, he went to Nashville and flew helicopters, supply helicopters to the offshore oil rigs out of Louisiana. And he emptied ashtrays in some of the music studios for 5 years in Nashville. And then people started listening to his songs. And he ended up doing exactly what he wanted to do. And he found his way into the movies. He didn't seek that, but they sought him. And he's 87 now. And he was diagnosed with Lyme disease some years ago, and he's not doing real well. But he's the guy who lived a full life, and he found the thing he wanted to do, and he did it despite the disappointment of his family. When he left the Army wanted him to teach at West Point. He didn't want to be a teacher. He either wanted to go fight in Vietnam at the time, or he wanted to be a songwriter. And so he threw all of his success away, quote unquote, and he became successful again, doing exactly what it was that he wanted to do. So I see him now. He's not going to tour anymore. He's a little bit unsteady on his feet. But he's a guy who I think embodied that full humanity. And I got to tell him my version of that almost 20 years ago now, in 2005. I got a chance to meet him and talk to him for about 2 or 3 minutes. And he was just really present and appreciative of everything that I said. So I got to meet my hero. It was kind of cool.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And just a little more clarity to our people that we choose, I believe, and I believe you're doing the same thing, it's not about always choosing someone different, choosing who's on our heart, who's on our spirit in that moment.
Yeah.
And so whether you may have said it before or said it each week, I think that's what's more. And as opposed to saying someone different every time, even though it's fun and research and try to find someone different, there is a certain amount of joy in that as well. But I would say for me, my choice, and that's a great choice you said, you should have before, but some of the things you laid out this time, I learned more about them. You make me interested to go and do a little more research on Chris Christopherson. Like, I know the name, I know him as an actor. I can still picture his face in certain maybe a movie or two that I've seen him in, and I think he only played about one or two movies, right? Most as a singer, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he probably has. He's definitely probably close to 100 movies, maybe more.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of them weren't. He even says a lot of them weren't that good. But he was in the Blade movies with Wesley Snipes.
Yes, that's what I thought. Like, I know him, but I don't. What you just shared with me shows me I didn't know him, and he warrants me to do inspiration and more research on him. I would say my choice is going to be Sandra Day O'Connor.
Yeah.
And I say her, understanding everything about her, but I would say again, at least that I know why I'm choosing her is because when they talked about her, they talked about the fact that, again, Reagan appointed her, and I would think that just initially, I disagree with most things Reagan did, me personally, and I don't think there would be anybody who I would actually see an agreement with Reagan, and that to me shows that I need to learn more on my end as well. Secondly, it's because she didn't always just go with who Reagan wanted her to vote, vote the way Reagan wanted her to vote. And that to me makes her intriguing. It makes her interesting. And then finally, she voted on a lot of different cases that were more that she felt was in the best interest of America and constitutionally correct than a conservative perspective. And that to me, which I admire, is can you be fully human and show courage? And that to me shows courage. So that's why I lift her up right now. And I'm going to do more research on her. And there may be some things about her that voting records I like. But at the same time, I don't think it's going to taint that perspective of she shows growth and she showed courage. Again, I don't have to necessarily agree with every opinion that she came up with, but I still can respect and admire her regardless.
Yeah.
You see that, Reggie? Screen is frozen, actually.
On my end.
I'm sorry, you still?
Yeah, I'm still here. Everything just blinked. And I'm still here.
Okay, you're blurry now, actually, and
Okay.
I guess we're getting there. We're right at the end of our podcast, and things are starting to give us a little technical difficulties. We had a shaky connection to begin with. I see you're moving now, so I just want to say this, Reggie. Again, thank you for choosing such a wonderful. Thank you for again being present Thank you again for committing to the work, the effort, the time it took to write the book, and just really can to explore these narratives as you talk about as we got to heal ourselves. I think you chose a wonderful topic, and I think you continue to exhibit the fully heuristics on an everyday basis, that definitely on a weekly basis when we do this podcast, and I appreciate that. And then finally, I want to thank our listening audience for listening to another show of Fully Human Connections podcast, which we do each Monday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And till next week, I want to wish everyone a wonderful journey along the path of becoming more fully human. Thank you all.